Welcome back to the Rules of Engagement. We're now on to the Q&A section. First question is going to be from Zoji. I think that's how I pronounce it. Do you think round Zerg with Ultras can start using drops finally? So the first thing is you probably don't want to use Ultra drops too much. And the main reason is in general in Starcraft 2, right? This isn't always true, but in general, the more gas-intensive units are more valuable in large-scale battles, right? Your spellcasters, your ultralists, your broodlords, these are the type of units that are super important to win these large engagements. So if you're thinking about using units to harass, drop harass, run bys, nidus, whatever it is, right? You should be asking yourself the question: is it worth using a unit like an ultralist to drop, a Templar to storm drop? As Terran, should I harass with ghosts and nukes? And how much more damage can I get done with those units versus Marine drops, Zealot Warpins, speeding run bys, right? And the real answer is, in general, dropping an Ultras will almost never. I can't think of a single opportunity where it would do more damage than a speeding drop, right? As far as just speedings do so much more damage per second than Ultras for cost, and they're easier to replace. They're not quite as important in the main battle, so I would really avoid dropping Ultras, stick with dropping speedings. But that gets to the second question. Well, you know, maybe you weren't just talking about dropping Ultras, you're using drops with an Ultras composition. And I think there's room for drops once you can afford to get that drop upgrade without worrying too much. The general Zerg principle is, okay, I don't need to harass my opponent too much because I'll just macro, and when they come to me, I'll beat their army, right? So that's the way Zergs play right now. But eventually, you'll get in these super late game situations where your opponent doesn't come to you. They macro greedily too. Protoss are taking 4 or 5 bases, they're defending them well. And all of a sudden, as a Zerg player going Ultralist, right, we actually saw this in a recent GSL match. You're like, well, I got to attack the Protoss before he just gets too strong. And they just run all Ultras into gateway walls and bounce their heads off them and lose, right? And so that's super late game situations where drops become insanely good. Because as they take more bases, they get more spread out. And while photon cannons can be decent, all it takes is one Viper with 2 blinding clouds, and you can usually really make those photon cannons not nearly as good against drops. Supplement it with your Zergian drops, and then, of course, they won't be camping all those walls. Your Ultras can break through once you're distracting with drop play. So, drop play is great. Don't get obsessed with it. Only do it in the super late game situations when your opponent's 4 to 5 bases. Before that, you really want to focus on your macro and denying their army when it moves out. Next question from Ryoku. It says, what options can a Protoss player go for once they scout a Zerg getting early 3rd hatchery? How should they apply pressure? So there's 3. If your opponent is aggressively macroing, right? What that means is they're trying to gather as much resources as they can as fast as possible. You have 3 options. 1, go for a giant timing to try to kill them, right? And that's a fine option. You can try to do a 7-8 gate. You know, you can do a 2-base immortal all in. And these builds can often work. That usually comes down to 1, is your macro perfect? Are you hitting your timing as fast as possible? Versus how good is their macro? How many units are they getting? How much supply are they getting by the minute mark when your timing hits? That's one factor in skill. The other factor is micro and tactics. Are they setting up the flanks they need to set up? How good are your force fields? How good is their stutter step and roaches? Are they focusing the right units? Are you focusing the right units? So it comes down to just purely macro and micro. If you feel that's your strength, go for the timing build. Another option, of course, is to put on some harass, some fancy harass, take a 3rd, and then the question is, my 3rd's not as fast as theirs, but can I do enough damage with harass to compensate the fact that my 3rd's a little bit slower? And this is really going to emphasize not only a macro, but also multitasking, right? Because you're having to control your 3 base economy while putting on harass. You have to do the same thing while defending harass. So the multitasking gets strained a bit in that situation. If you think your multitasking is great, go for harass while taking your own 3rd. And of course, the last option, just take your own 3rd super fast. And as long as you have a solid build, you should be able to defend that very fast 3rd if they take a fast 3rd. But now we're talking about, okay, you're taking a fast 3rd, now it's coming out to scouting them to see how they're following up so you can react appropriately. And it's going to come into understanding how to make a really strong mid to late game composition depending on how they're playing. So if you feel your scouting and your compositional decisions are very strong, take your own fast 3rd base. So those are 3 ways to deal with a fast 3rd, and each one is better depending on your skill sets. You'll see different pros do any one of those 3 different options depending on their own style and their own skill set. This wraps up the Q&A and the entire episode of Rules of Engagement. Thank you guys for watching, and remember, tune in every day at 6 p.m. Eastern for WCS America content. Of course, Rules of Engagement will be directly after that content. See you guys tomorrow. Bye.